Dr. Swarnamalya Ganesh. She's based in Chennai. She's a dance historian and the director of Rangamandra School of Performing Arts and an assistant professor at Kriya University. She learned Bharatanatyam at a young age, and as she grew, she began to understand that she was privileged to learn from a stellar lineage of gurus. As she explored the origins of Bharatanatyam, she realized that it was called Sadir in the 1940s, and her questions about the dancers themselves increased. And this is what she will share with us today in her talk. Sadir, muted voices, difficulties in hearing the subaltern. Over to you.
Thank you, Gautami, and thank you for having me here. In the interest of time, I have a paper that's prepared, so I'm just going to read out from that. Sadir is the name of Bharatanatyam, associated with its performers called Devadasis. Much like the rest of the agrarian society, they too were part of a system of land, occupation, and caste-based segmentary formations. The unique element, though, was that it was fairly common for members, especially women in this community, to be brought into its fold by way of religious and social sanctions, such as practices of dedication, adoption, etc. Therefore, the community composition often varied from various middling castes of the day. Without going into the details of the social structures of the Devadasi community, one can say that heritage, or that which the women inherited in this community, was based on initiation as an artist and not merely birth. Let me move directly to the problem of inheritance, which is more relevant for our purpose today. In the 20th century, public discourse raged about the morality of the Devadasi. This everybody knows. Although upon first glance it looks suspiciously oriental, it was largely an Indian elite dilemma. The dwindling economy left many migrant women artists quite vulnerable to exploitation, and this was argued as her promiscuity. This moment of annihilation defined limited and distorted contact between various subcultures within the South Indian society that had previous histories. The mounting oppressor-victim binary discourse did not account for patterns of admiration and collaborative positions adopted within these cultures. After all, equality and inequality are not to be the sole determinants of cultural encounters. Figueroa. Not for a moment am I making an argument here that there was no inequality, exploitation, or marginalization of the Devadasi women by dominant cultures or by inherent discriminatory practices. The point I'm trying to make here is that even as the women artist was marginalized, her art or her heritage was sought after. Her inheritance has been made the site of conflict, locating appropriation squarely in the binary where structural power of the upper castes had determined both the personal and political. As a student from age 3 under various Devadasis, I see an insider-outsider perspective to the conflict. By virtue of having a lifelong Guru-Sishya relationship with these women, I have been freed from the urgency to narrate their story. Because as a learner, her life and art are not stories to be told. That does not mean that I receive without context or complacent to social imbalances between us. The prism I see is that of her art. After all, the Devadasi is by definition an artist. I associate the moment of conflict to the Epicurean idea, all of history is contingent, an encounter. I'm just going to share my screen here to show you a 1941 short film clip in Tamil.
என்னவோ விசேஷம் கொண்டிருக்கு. நல்ல சம்பளம் தான். ஆமா வச்சு வாங்க. என்ன லெட்டர் போடாம திடீர்னு வந்துட்டீங்க? என்ன வச்சு விசேஷம்? எப்படியா கச்சேரி? அட கடவுளே, இந்த கரிகாலத்துல புதுசா என்னென்னமோ ஏற்படுது. பள்ளிக்கூடத்துல கூட இப்ப பரதநாட்டியம் கத்துக்கணுமா? ஆமா ஆமா, அது ஏன் கேக்குறீங்க? அதுல நம்ம குழந்தை ரொம்ப கெட்டிக்காரின்னு மெடல் எல்லாம் வாங்கியிருக்கா. இப்ப வாய்ப்புன்றாங்களே, அதுக்கு கலெக்டர் பங்களாவில ஒரு ஆட்டம், அதுக்கு இவன் நாட்டியம், அதுக்காக பழகுறா. ஓஹோ.
At the forefront of this search for her heritage were, of course, the Brahmins. Here, one must be informed of the Brahmin community's historical connections with the arts as poets, composers, and patrons for over 4 centuries in South India. The disenfranchisement of the Devadasi woman's social position coincided with the rise of the middle-class Brahmin woman's emancipation. The need to protect the Devadasis held under constitutional consciousness collided with the dismantling of traditional patronage systems like the temples. Overall, the colonial experience made a paradigm shift in all spheres of life, such as nationalism, industrialization, caste-based politics, globalization, only to name a few. I identified this social moment when too much was happening in the Indian society as the moment when the art of the Devadasi, her heritage, was redistributed. It is a history of encounters. I'm not suggesting in any way a series of happy coincidences or an apology for the marginalization of the Devadasi at the hands of patriarchy or caste. But this is in fact to redefine the narrative that has oversimplified the situations in which the Devadasi's life was torn apart. Despite battling poverty and stigma, as in all stories of resilience from the margins, the lives of women whom I have learned under uphold their pride as artists rather than as tales of distress and defeat. If one chooses to read between the lines and cull from these lives a universal theory that they wish to tell the world, that is naturally the point of appropriation. So how can the common reader of the history of Devadasi understand appropriation? Sadir is the Devadasi heritage that was taught and learnt. Around 1930s, the teachers of this heritage became the men of the community as opposed to the women. These men decided to participate in transferring this heritage to non-hereditary women. Did this obliterate the voices of their own women? Yes. But even in this moment of appropriation, one must see a bid for survival. But the marginalization from these moments comes in the form of rhetoric. I'm just going to share here. One second. A letter that was written to me by the Isavelalar Sangam in Tirunelveli. It's in Tamil, just sharing the text here, where the Kanaku of that particular, the manager of that particular Sangam, waxes eloquent about the once great, now fallen history of the Devadasi. Whether learning from male gurus or, as in my case, learning directly from the women gurus, one thing is of prime importance. The moment of transfer of heritage is one built on trust. Unlike in any ethnographic research, where rapport is trust-building mechanism that primarily serves the interest of the researcher, the Guru-Sishya mode gives far more agency to the person who is the transferer, the Guru. Due to this reversed power structure, the learning becomes a serious, long-term engagement that allows the student to sensitively understand the complexities of the Devadasi's existence at the crossroads of historic and continued encounters. The current imaginations of the Devadasi problem totalizes her as a homogenized entity whose experience of marginalization is assumed as something evil. These are constructions far from reality, built often on the interpreting agents' knowledge gathering from their own colonial experience, vis-a-vis caste, secularism, etc. Let me illustrate this with an example. Dance scholars identify 1947 as a seminal moment when the Devadasi Dedication Act was passed, criminalizing the practice. But my guru, Muthukannamal Amma, does not recognize 1947 as that moment when her social status and livelihood were irrevocably altered. She, in fact, was dancing up until 1970s, both in the temple of Viralimalai and the Samasthanams of Pudukkottai. What happened in 1971, the Privy Purse abolition, directly affected her economic inheritance and patronage from the Samasthanam. Hence, she sees Indira Gandhi's role in the moment of disintegration as more significant than that of Muthulakshmi Reddy's, who brought about the Devadasi Abolition Act. I'm going to share a video where my guru articulates this.
அதே மத்த ராமச்சந்திரன் சொன்னாரு 18 ஏக்கர் காடு 2 ஏக்கர் வய இந்த அட்டைகளுக்கு வந்து இந்த அட்டை லாவணம் வேற இல்லை எனக்கு நான் வர பார்த்தா எனக்கு லாவணம் பேரு எங்க அப்பாவுக்கு முடியல எங்க அப்பா பேருக்கு மாத்திருக்காங்க எங்க அப்பா வந்து எங்க பேருக்கு மாத்திருக்காரு அப்புறமே எங்க அப்பா போற காலத்துலாம் வந்துட்டாரு நமக்கு கீழே அடிக்க நேற்று எடுத்துக்காங்க அந்த லாவணம் அந்த பொம்பளைகளுக்கு பணமே வாங்கல மகாராஜா காலத்துல கடமை ஆயிடுச்சு இந்த நிலம் சும்மாவே பெற்றா ஆம்பளை வந்து 20 தான் காசு அதுல எங்க ஐயாவுக்கெல்லாம் 14,000 போட்டுச்சு 14,000 போட்டு அவர் காடெல்லாம் விற்று இது அந்த நிலத்தெல்லாம் மறுபடியும் எடுத்து போச்சேன் மீண்டும் எடுத்துட்டாங்க இல்லையா அப்போ
Now let's move to the next part of the problem of appropriation. The question of who is listening to her voice, how, where, when, and how is it transmitted. If one wants to understand the Devadasi's position, we must consider her artistic practice as the prime material through which she establishes her agentic thrust, social expressions, and uses it as a co-constructive mechanism. Let me again use the example of the Guru-Sishya paradigm. Even when the men were teaching the non-hereditary women, they stuck to traditional methods of transfer that involved oral learnings, memorizing, native language use, and native social contextualizations. For example, my guru and I spoke exclusively only in Tamil. Sarasama started to teach me dances whose literary content was very erotic as early as age 12, 13. I was made to sing and dance these compositions, but the meanings of these songs were never explicitly discussed. It was only through music, gestures, and mime articulations that I was taught. Today, huge debates rage on about the appropriateness of teaching young children such pieces, seeking censorship, which actually cuts through the method of inheritance, thereby re-stigmatizing the Devadasi as promiscuous. However, the reality is it takes many years of diligent practice of these intricate compositions, by which time the learner will have no cultural shock, instead absolute awe for the art of subtlety in the Devadasi's portrayal. Even the Oriental gaze was very, very cleverly subsumed by the Sadar artists. My snake charmers dance, peacock dances, English language songs, company compositions, the violin and clarinet as part of concerts. So the subaltern really was comfortably domesticating the Western gaze and conversing with it on its own terms. These interactions of the art with the life of the artist cannot be observed in an ethnographic exercise. Therefore, a non-dancer who is a researcher who speaks for the Devadasi is twice removed from her. Once by the lack of the material or the natural language of dance, and once again by adopting the lens of the Western language. The third difficulty in hearing the subaltern today is that she is always framed in the English language as the subject that is unfinished in its democratizing. This illusionary subjectivity homogenizes her and isolates her as a project that needs our assistance. In a recent book titled Unfinished Gestures, the author speaks for the Devadasi using the subaltern conceptual framework. what we see are ideologies that advocate the Devadasi's position against hegemonic structural powers. But what is cloaked is the author's need to prove that he is political and modern, both determinants of post-colonial frames. In his claim to neutralize power, Devesh Soneji recolonizes the Devadasi and traps her in his ideological conceptions, which she may not have subscribed to. A non-performer, he established an ethnographer-informant relationship with my guru R. Muthukannamma a decade ago. These interactions spanned over 4 brief summers during his field trips to India from the US, accompanied by his dancer friend. They approached Muthukannamma to learn some Sadir pieces. The author himself was only an observer during these sessions. Deeply limited by his access to her native language, both dance as well as Tamil, he discovered her entirely in translation. While she has no recollection of him or his direct interactions with her, he embarked to view her through the social ideological lenses he has acquired. In the book, he tells the story of my guru and that of a few other Devadasi women from the Kalavantula tradition of Andhra. None of these women have met each other. They do not share geographic, social, artistic contexts. In meshing them together under the net of his political and modern frames, at once, all their voices have been muted. They are pointed to as over their subjects throughout the book, to whom only Soneji, as observer ethnographer, has exclusive access. Invisibilizing his own power and male privilege, the book appropriates both the Devadasi's subaltern heritage and her material as convenient tools to validate his interpretation of them. My guru tells me how she agreed to only teach Kannada Karanga, as she would call, Devesh's dancer friends some Sadir. The grip she wished to have over these interactions between Kannada Karanga and herself as the guru with agency was debilitated when, without informing her, she was observed by the ethnographer. Even today, years after the book has been released and received with numerous academic awards in the Western world, Muthukannamma has no access to this work, which is in the English language.
கோயிலை பத்தி கூட நாங்க கேட்கலாங்க. சதுரை பத்தி கேட்டாலே தஞ்சாவூர்ல கத்துக்கிட்டேன்னா நீங்க நம்ம சொல்லி கொடுத்த சொன்ன கோயிலை பத்தி நம்ம வரலாறு பத்தி ஒரு கேட்டுக்கல. சத்தியமா சொல்றேங்க, கன்னடாக்காரன் நான் புக்கு போறேன்னா சொல்லியே கொடுத்துருக்க மாட்டேன். நான் உங்கள்கிட்ட கத்துக்கத்தாம வந்திருக்கேன், கத்துக்கிறேன். நான் எங்கே போனாலும் நான் ஆடுறேம்மா சதுரன்னு சொல்லி சொன்னாங்க. அதனால நான் கத்து கொடுத்தேன். இப்போ அவங்க என்ன பண்றாங்க அப்படின்னு எனக்கு தெரியாது.
Muthukannamma is 80 plus years old today and boldly articulates in Tamil her identity. Devadasi, daughter of Ramachandran Natavanar, not a courtesan, not merely an essay-vellalar. She wants to exercise her narrative only through her material, Sadir. As a guru, she holds the position of power in a relationship and decides to transfer Sadir in the traditional methods to Sishyas who can sensitively receive it. In conclusion, without fluent capacity in material and native language, attempting to understand the subaltern's heritage is an exercise that superimposes theoretical frames on the assumed unfinished subject. In a world where social media frenzied consumption swiftly circulates these theories in a factoidal manner, enmeshing them with public domain understandings of freedom, equality, rights, etc., the problem of appropriation in the case of the Devadasi conflict is as present as historic. The trend of making her visible but muting her voice, or making her visible by ventriloquizing, or to point to models of historic oppression in a language that does not acknowledge its own hegemony of representation is fundamentally a colonial setup. I'm neither suggesting complacency of remaining in current positions, nor the totalizing of history towards some universal notion of chance and encounter as solutions. I'm also not suggesting the Guru Sishya model or dancing, singing, and native language as material that is flawless and as alternative tools to represent the Devadasi and her heritage. I am also not saying that all those who get fluent capacity in her material necessarily hold the key to knowing her better. There is no one history. There are several histories, and each history is contingent upon many encounters. To recognize this in the Devadasi conflict is to realize her life as the meaning to the material that is her art. I use the word realize because in realization, the frenzied need for both interpretation and representation dissolve. The deal is this: we free her from our theoretical representations so that she may redefine herself. This is the problem of appropriation, the reason why you should not write a book on the Devadasi. Thank you.